happen by smoking. So alcohol and other drugs is something that's more prevalent in older grades, such as middle and high school, but it's still an important topic to talk about nonetheless, especially when younger children usually see this type of activity more so in their parents than themselves. So factors that influence the use is peer pressure and image. It's the need to look cool to other people. Others include if it's in your environment, like I previously mentioned, parents drink or using drugs, you are more likely to use those drugs and alcohol too. So a program that really struck me when I was reading about this chapter was DARE. That is something that I even saw in my own school, and how I also saw some of the other programs mentioned that were fairly ineffective, and how I saw a lot of my peers that participated in the DARE program grow up to use hard drugs like meth, amphetamines, inhalants, and more. And so there are other more effective programs that are mentioned, and those are things to be better considered. So the one anecdote that I want to talk about is how people think drinking can make you look cool as a teenager, and how I have seen plenty of my friends get in trouble for underage drinking. My first semester in college, I had a friend that was very, very drunk, and he was from California. So he had no clue about snow or any of that. He had never really been in it before, and it was winter in New York, and I went to go help him and saw him get very, very hurt trying to walk around drunk in the snow. Now, there were other issues that came from that because he ended up having to go to the hospital because of how much he had drank. Overall, it's just underage drinking like that is just not a good idea. It can cause problems with your liver. It could cause problems with your kidneys. It affects the blood in you. It's just not something that's good for those to really do. It's something that you should prevent doing and abstain from doing for as long as possible. And just remember that there is a legal age limit to purchasing alcohol for a reason. So the second to last topic I'm going to talk about is promoting sexual health. Heavy exposure to sexual content and media can lead to early sexual activity, which is going to increase the chances of STDs in younger people and teen pregnancy. 47% of high school students have had intercourse, and 1 out of 4 of those teenagers get an STD each year. When a sex education and prevention focus on preventing pregnancy and HIV and STD prevention, it's more effective than talking about preaching abstinence and preaching more about how these deadly diseases are going to ruin your entire life, which they could, but you can't talk like that in fear of forming more anxiety in children. You should focus on that you're going to want to deliver a consistent message about abstaining from sexual activity, because teenagers are going to do what they're going to want to do, and you just need to focus the message of how you should try to abstain from it as long as possible, and if you are going to do it, you should be safe about it using birth control and condoms. Another thing that's important is making sure you use the proper terminology, the proper words for your sexual organs. And the thing that struck me when reading about this chapter was the importance of using proper terminology. They talked about how you could start teaching at a preschool level for sex education, specifically talking about body parts. And that is something super important because there are a lot of kids that get sexually abused and sexually assaulted. And this directly relates to the intentional injury and violence chapter, because there are children who can't report what's going on to them in the home because they don't know the proper terminology. This has been reported in plenty of places. So you need to make sure that when you are teaching sex education as young as possible, that you're teaching them mostly the proper terminology for their organs, because this is something that they do need to know in their lives. So we talk about ending this class and this book on a more sad note by talking about managing loss, death, and grief. 2 and 3 children experience death of a friend or family member by the age of 10. There's a lot of misconstrued thoughts on death, such as them being asleep or on vacation, and more that lead to a lot of confusion. Also, things like the TV where characters will die one day and then come back in the next episode are confusing. And a lot of children get left with the thought that eventually their loved one is going to return. So it's important to talk about being a little bit more blunt and just saying that they are gone. If they ask, their heart has stopped beating. Just be there for a student to talk and comfort them through it. Don't expect them to be happy. Do not force them into a routine. It's just going to make things worse. And if need be, refer them to a counselor just to talk about it. Death is something that's really hard to grasp, especially for younger children. And like I previously mentioned, there's already a lot of misconstrued thoughts and myths that surround death that they believe, such as the boogeyman, because a lot of parents don't want to talk about death because it's such a hard topic to talk about, and they don't want to hurt their children. And unfortunately, as teachers, that's something that you need to talk about, is the sad reality that death is an inevitable thing, and it happens to everyone of old and young age. So the one thing that I want to talk about with this one in personal relation to this chapter is how I thought about the fact that I lost like 6 family members in 2008. In 2008, I was 7 going on 8 years old. And I was in about the age range, as the textbook talks about, how I knew death was inevitable, but I still thought it really only happened to old people. I still thought death was something that could have even been caused by an outside force like the boogeyman or the Grim Reaper. And how because I had so many people that had died that year, my parents at that point could not avoid talking about death. They had to sit down with my sister and I and explain to us, we're sorry, but this is something that is inevitable. And it is something that happens to everyone, no matter what age you could be. And that it's not a deep sleep, it's not a vacation, and that they are gone. And as unfortunate as it is, and as sad as that has made me before, it has helped me in the long run, where family deaths are sad to me, but they don't affect me as heavily, because I have an understanding that they got to live their life the way that it was meant to happen, and that, you know, that death was inevitable, and that it hit them at that time, and that there's nothing really you can do about it. So that's all I have for this. It was such a great course, and there was so much more information that I could talk about in this big book. But that's the things that stuck with me the most. I want to thank you again for providing all of this information and all of this great content for me to learn. There was a lot of statistics that I learned out of this. There was a lot of prevention methods that I've learned out of this. Overall, it was something that was very enjoyable and something that was very good for me to learn. And I hope you enjoyed this video, the personal anecdotes that went along with it, and how I was able to find things in my life that have made me think about the information that this course has taught me.